There is a special kind of silence that grows around a child who feels hated. It is not always loud abuse or constant shouting that creates it. Often it is the quiet absence of warmth, the subtle rejection, the way love seems to skip over them and land on someone else. The hated child grows up sensing that something is fundamentally wrong, not just with their environment, but with who they are. This belief, once planted, shapes the mind in ways that can last a lifetime. The psychology of the hated child begins with perception. Children are exquisitely sensitive to emotional cues. They notice tone before words, facial expressions before explanations, and patterns before promises. When a caregiver consistently responds with irritation, neglect, contempt, or indifference, the child does not interpret this as the adult's failure. Instead, they internalize it as personal unworthiness. The child concludes, often unconsciously, "If I were better, I would be loved." Unlike children who experience occasional rejection balanced by affection, the hated child lives in an environment where emotional safety is unpredictable or absent. Praise feels rare or conditional. Criticism feels constant or disproportionate. Even neutral interactions can feel tense, as if affection must be earned through perfection or obedience. Over time, the child learns to monitor themselves constantly, searching for the behavior that might finally make them acceptable. One of the most damaging aspects of being the hated child is the lack of a secure attachment. Attachment forms when a child learns that their emotional needs will be met consistently. When this bond is broken or never properly formed, the child's nervous system adapts to chronic stress. Hypervigilance becomes normal. The child watches for mood shifts, anger, or rejection the way other children watch for playtime. This heightened awareness may look like maturity, but it is survival. Many hated children grow up in families where favoritism exists. A sibling may be openly adored, protected, or excused, while the hated child is blamed, ignored, or scapegoated. This dynamic creates deep confusion. The child sees proof that love is possible, but not for them. This comparison intensifies shame and envy, emotions that the child then feels guilty for having. They may believe their jealousy is further evidence of being bad. In some families, the hatred is subtle. There are no harsh words, only coldness. No outright rejection, only emotional distance. The child may be fed, clothed, and educated, yet starved of affection. Because there is no obvious abuse, the child often doubts their own experience. They may tell themselves they are too sensitive or ungrateful. This self-gaslighting becomes another layer of psychological damage, teaching the child to distrust their own emotions. As the hated child grows, their sense of self becomes fragile. Self-worth is not something they feel naturally, it is something they chase. Some become high achievers, believing success will finally make them lovable. Others give up early, convinced that effort is pointless because rejection is inevitable. Both paths are rooted in the same belief. Love must be earned, and failure confirms unworthiness. Emotionally, the hated child often struggles to identify and express feelings. When emotions were ignored or punished in childhood, the child learns to suppress them. Anger becomes dangerous. Sadness becomes embarrassing. Joy feels suspicious, as if it might provoke resentment. As adults, these individuals may feel emotionally numb or overwhelmed, swinging between detachment and intensity without understanding why. Relationships in adulthood often mirror early family dynamics. The hated child may unconsciously seek out partners, friends, or authority figures who are emotionally unavailable or critical. Familiar pain feels safer than unfamiliar kindness. When someone treats them with genuine care, it can feel uncomfortable or even threatening. They may push it away, convinced it will not last. Trust is another major casualty. When caregivers, the very people meant to protect and nurture, become sources of harm or rejection, the child learns that closeness equals danger. As adults, they may keep emotional distance, fearing that vulnerability will lead to humiliation or abandonment. Alternatively, they may become overly attached, desperate for reassurance, terrified of being left again. One of the most painful psychological consequences is the development of a harsh inner critic. The voice that once belonged to the rejecting parent becomes internalized. Long after the child grows up, that voice continues to judge, belittle, and shame them. Even in moments of success, the inner critic whispers that it is not enough, that they are still fundamentally flawed. Shame plays a central role in the hated child's psychology. This is not guilt over something done wrong, but a deep belief of being wrong. Shame affects posture, speech, and self-expression. It can make the individual shrink, apologize excessively, or avoid attention. It can also turn outward, manifesting as anger, defensiveness, or emotional withdrawal. Some hated children develop people-pleasing behaviors. They learn to anticipate others' needs, sacrifice their own desires, and avoid conflict at all costs. Approval becomes a form of emotional currency. While this may bring temporary acceptance, it often leads to burnout, resentment, and a sense of invisibility. The individual gives endlessly, yet still feels unseen. Others take the opposite path and develop emotional armor. They may appear cold, independent, or dismissive. This is not because they do not want connection, but because they learned early that needing others leads to pain. Independence becomes a shield, and vulnerability feels like weakness. Beneath this toughness often lies a deep, unacknowledged longing to be loved without conditions. The hated child may also struggle with identity. Without affirmation, they grow up unsure of who they are or what they deserve. Their sense of self may be defined by what they are not rather than what they are. They may ask themselves questions like, "Am I too much?" or "Am I not enough?" without ever finding satisfying answers. Despite the damage, the psychology of the hated child is not only about wounds, it is also about adaptation and strength. Many develop profound empathy, having learned early how painful rejection can be. They may be deeply sensitive to others' emotions, intuitive, and compassionate. They often become keen observers of human behavior, understanding unspoken dynamics that others overlook. Healing begins when the hated child, now an adult, recognizes that the rejection they experienced was not a reflection of their worth. This realization can be both liberating and painful. It requires grieving the childhood they did not receive, the love that was withheld, and the protection that never came. Grief is not weakness here. It is a necessary step toward reclaiming the self. Learning to reparent oneself is a crucial part of recovery. This involves developing self-compassion, setting boundaries, and responding to one's own emotional needs with care rather than criticism. It means challenging the inner voice that says love must be earned and replacing it with a gentler truth. Worth is inherent. Healthy relationships can also play a transformative role, though they often feel unfamiliar at first. Experiencing consistent kindness, respect, and emotional safety can slowly rewire old beliefs. Trust builds gradually, not through grand gestures, but through reliability and presence. Over time, the nervous system learns that connection does not always lead to pain. The psychology of the hated child reminds us that emotional neglect and rejection can be just as damaging as visible abuse. The absence of love leaves scars that are invisible but deeply felt. Yet it also shows the remarkable resilience of the human mind. Even those who grew up feeling unwanted can learn to build a life rooted in self-acceptance and genuine connection. Ultimately, the hated child carries two stories within them. One is the story of rejection, silence, and survival. The other is the story they choose to write as they heal. A story where love is no longer something to beg for, but something they are worthy of simply by existing.